Welcome to the RTS Guided Programming Coaching Call. I'm Mike Tushir. Welcome back. Got an interesting call for you today. A lot of questions have come in. My apologies about not having a call last week. My brother was in town, so I decided to spend some time with him. And we answered all the questions. We just did it via email instead of doing a live call for everybody. But we're back on schedule now, so let's get things rolling. First question up. Really has to do, it's more of an explanation of myoreps. So let me go ahead and get out my trusty notepad here so I can make some demonstrations for you guys. So notepad time. All right. So the question is really, how do we do myoreps? How are they annotated in our training and so forth? So let me give you an example, and we'll just kind of work through this example. So let's say that the exercise is rows, and what kind, it doesn't really matter. It calls for a set of 12 at a 9 RPE, then myoreps, 4 reps at a 10 RPE. It's going to say something like 2 activations. So what does that mean to you? First, you do your general warm-up, and then you start to ramp up to whatever you project to be your activation set. In this case, let's pretend it's going to be about 100 kilos for 12 reps at a 9 RPE. That's what you think you're going to be. You think you're going to be around 100 kilos. So you might do 50 kilos for a few, maybe 80 kilos for a few. Then you go do 100 kilos. So I'm not telling you to try it before you get there. Basically, you just ramp up to it. You take what you expect to be about a 12 rep at a 9 RPE weight. So you take 100 kilos, you do 12 reps. Let's say that's a 9 RPE. So what you do at this point is I want you to rest for 5 breaths. So take 5 breaths and then do 100 kilos for 4. Now, it might be an 8 the first time you do it. So you rest for 5 breaths. Then you take it again, 100 kilos for 4 more. This time it's going to be a 9, 5 more breaths. And you keep going. And when you get to 4 reps at a 10, you might want to try it again, and that would be fine. Or if you're not going to get it and you want to stop there, that's fine as well. But say you decide to go for it, so you only get 3 that time. So then you would stop. So then you're going to rest, probably 5 to 7 minutes. And then we're going to do our second activation. So this first set here where we did 12 reps at a 9 RPE, this is called an activation set. And I want you to do 2 of them in total. So we did 1, and that led to this cluster of myoreps. So then we're going to rest 5 to 7 minutes. Then we're going to do our second activation set. You're going to have to reduce the weight. It's not clear right now how much we're going to need to reduce it, but reduce it a substantial amount. Let's say 90 kilos. And then let's say also as you're repping this out, so the goal is to do 12 reps at a 9 RPE. But what if you're doing it and you get to 10 reps and that's a 9 RPE? Well, that's okay. Then stop there and just carry on. Conversely, if you get 13 reps or 14 reps at a 9 RPE, that's okay as well. The goal is to do 12 reps at a 9 RPE, and then you kind of repeat the sequence. This time, maybe you're a little bit more tired. maybe you get fewer sets. So that's an example of what it might look like. Now, if you had 3 activations required, you would rest 5 to 7 more minutes, probably take a little bit more weight off the bar and repeat this process. But this is the idea. The idea is to do this pseudo rest pause style training. We want you to get as many of these high activation reps as possible. So the theory, and I'm sure I'll get corrected on this because the theory gets updated all the time, but the theory, as I understand it, is that in a 12 rep set, you're only getting full muscular activation on the last few reps of that set. So by doing an activation set and keeping the rest intervals short, you're able to get more fully activated reps. In addition to that, and the reason that we've included them in your training, in particular at this stage of your training, is because we want you to, we're trying to activate satellite cells. This method has been shown to help us do that, so that's why we've got it planned, and that's why it's in the location that it's in. So since this method is really relying on getting you to do as many of these fully activated reps as possible, you need to go into this with a little more aggression than what we would normally do. So normally if we're doing repeat sets and we've got kind of endless work going on, then we adopt a more workman's type attitude. You know, we're not getting really psyched up for our training or anything like that. This one, I would rather see a little bit of aggression, and if you can make that last set, you know, you can get 1 or 2 more reps out of it, it's going to be worth it. There's only 2 real work sets in this anyway. You know, I mean, these are sets, but they're broken up by 5 breaths. It's kind of an extended set. So there's only 2 activations in this anyway. It's over fairly quickly. So go ahead, get with it a little bit. Try to really get as much work as you can done using this method. All right. The next question up is actually kind of the same thing, but it's about density training. So we're going to go ahead and break here. So that was myo reps. Now let's talk about density. All right. So for a density protocol, you might get something like rows again, but instead of a protocol like you're used to, or maybe even a myo rep protocol, it's going to say something like work up to 7 rep max load, maximize NL in 12 minutes. Now, what this means is that we want you to put approximately a 7 rep max load on the bar. And we want you to get as much volume as you can in 12 minutes. That's not a 12-minute extended set. That would be really, really awful, impossible even. So let's kind of work through another example. Let's change the lifter a little bit, and let's say that this lifter's 7 rep max, we're projecting our 7 rep max to be around 100 kilos. So same sort of thing. We're going to do a general warm-up. We might do 50 for 5. We might do 80 for 5, whatever. Then we're going to put what we expect to be a 7 rep max load on the bar. We don't have to actually do it as a 7 rep max load. I'm not telling you to take a 7 rep max load and then, or take a 7 rep max and then start your 12 minutes or anything like that. You're going to put what you expect to be a 7 rep max on the bar. And then we're going to start our clock. And then you're going to take you're going to do as much volume with this as you can in the 12 minutes. Now, this first set, you might do 5 reps at 8, in which case, you're right on the money. Or maybe you start to do your reps and you're like, boy, I really undershot what I thought my 7 rep max load would be. So you do 10 reps at 8. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that we're going to put a weight on a bar. Hopefully it's close to our 7 rep max. It does not matter if it's exact. Hopefully it's close to our 7 rep max though. So let's say we got it this time. We do 100 for 5 at 8. You might rest for a minute, maybe 90 seconds. Then you do 100 for 5 more at 9. Rest another minute or 90 seconds, 5 reps. This time, maybe you drop the reps down. You go 4 reps at 8. 4 reps. 9. You get the idea. And it's going to vary a little bit. You're gonna keep going, doing as much as you can, total volume wise. So you get to your last set, and you'll know it's your last set because you'll be watching the stopwatch, and it'll say like 11 minutes and 30 seconds or something like that. And you know that you're almost out of time. This is going to be your last set. So then you really kind of burn out on your last one. You might get 6 reps at a 10. That would actually be really good. It's probably more likely going to be 4 reps at a 10 or something like that. But you get the idea. You're going to rest, a minute, maybe 2 minutes between each of these sets. The idea is that you rest as short as possible so that you can maximize your total amount of volume. The purpose for this, you are going to get a nice hypertrophy effect from it just by virtue of the fact that you're getting a lot of volume in. The reason that we have it programmed is that it helps you to develop sport-specific conditioning. By doing density work, think of it as energy system training for powerlifting. Your ability to tolerate volume will go up over time. Your need for rest periods will decrease over time, but you've got to be willing to work hard during those 12 or 16 or 8 minutes, whatever the case may be. All right, so that's it, I believe, for my notepad. So let me bring back up the old camera here. All right. Okay, next question says, is any of this work this week intended to be beltless? I was curious since we're starting a new cycle. Yeah, basically, if it's not designated to be done with a belt, like it doesn't say with belt at the end, then that's an option for you to go beltless on that lift. So we're including beltless work throughout the whole training cycle. I will say that if you feel like you need to use a belt for safety reasons or anything like that, then by all means use one. It's not clear that that would be detrimental to your overall performance in any way, especially over time. So use a belt if you feel like you need it, but if it's not specifically recommended, then in general I would go without. So there's actually quite a bit of beltless work if you look at like the cycle totals. All right, so next up we got a bunch of program modification questions, including some longer ones. So let's get into those. First up says, this is just kind of a generalized question. I got a few questions about front squats. So let's talk about front squats a little bit. In particular, why are front squats in the program? What are some common technical breakdowns? And what should you do if you cannot front squat? First, why are front squats in the program? One, it's a good general strength movement for your legs and especially for your back. And that kind of leads me into the common technical breakdowns for the front squat. What we see most often are people that fail in the front squat, not because their legs fail, but because they can't keep the bar on their shoulders. Basically, their chest falls, their torso leans forward, the bar falls off your shoulders. as they get tired, that's kind of a compensation. You know, they sit back a little bit more and they're relying a little bit more on that hip drive. The chest falls, the bar falls. I don't really care how you do them. You know, if you want to use a clean grip, if you're going to put straps on the bar, personally, I cross my arms in front bodybuilder style because, I mean, let's face it, front squats are terribly uncomfortable. And if you can get any sort of comfort out of it, then that's fine by me. So for me, I cross my arms in front, and that seems to help quite a bit. It makes it doable. So that will be another kind of piece of technical advice. The main thing is keep your chest up, however you can. And that's also one of the main reasons that we do front squats, is because it can help train that aspect of your mechanic. It can help teach you to maintain an upright torso. It can help train you to maintain thoracic extension. And then also it's really good focus on knee extension torque. And because of the mechanic, it places less emphasis on the hip extension piece. Let's see. Last piece of the front squat question is, what do you do if you absolutely cannot do front squats? If you have a safety squat bar, I would use that as an alternative. If you don't have a safety squat bar, I would say doing some sort of high bar squat is going to be as close as you're going to get. It's not the same thing. It's probably as close as we're going to get, though. So yeah, I would look into it. You can also look into those manta ray bar attachments that help the bar sit on your shoulders a little bit better. I have some. I've used them occasionally. They definitely make it more comfortable, but I think they make the mechanic harder because of the way it's shaped. Instead of the bar sitting here on your collarbone, the bar sits here on your front delt. And I mean, it's just a couple inches, but when we're talking about how upright you have to keep your torso to keep the bar on your shoulders, it's a lot. So I don't know that I would particularly recommend the manta ray attachment. I would just say get used to front squatting. I mean, that's what we tell people with back squats, and why you shouldn't use a bar pad for back squats too. You just get used to it. So yeah, I think front squats kind of fall in the same category. They're harder to get used to because we're not doing them 3 times a week. If we were, you would get used to them in a month and you'd never have to worry about it again. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on front squatting. All right, next up says, is there a specific reason every training session is full body? Could I rearrange it into an upper-lower split, or is that detrimental to the effects? Yeah, the reason it's arranged full body is because we want it to be full body. It's definitely intentional. The training variable that this affects the most is your training frequency. Training with a high frequency is in general better. If we can practice a movement 3 times a week, that's 3 rested practices that you get each week rather than 1. So in that sense, you can take the same amount of work and spread it out, and you get a higher quality of work. Now, what does that mean to you in terms of performance? Because that's really what we're all ultimately after. Well, studies show that your performance is going to be better as a result of that. And it's not just studies either. We see it performance-wise as well. I don't reference studies very often because that's not my strong suit. But I know Coach Wolf in Norway did a study on elite junior powerlifters. He had one group training with a frequency of 3 times a week. The other group trained with a frequency of 6 times a week. All other variables were the same. Their volume, the intensity, everything else was the same. The group that trained 6 times a week had a much better response. And this is something that I've seen in my athletes as well. Training with a high frequency takes a while for them to get used to. But then once they do get used to it, they're much better off for it. Their rate of improvement is better, their skill in the movements is better, and then when they do go back to a body part split, the conversation is always different. The conversation is, I feel a little bit rusty and stuff like that. It's because you don't know how skilled you can get at a movement if you haven't practiced it to that level. So the first time that you ever did, say, a squat, it probably felt awkward because you'd never practiced it before. And similarly, if you shot a basketball, every day, let's say 3 times a week, you would get a bit comfortable. And then if you took some time off, you'd feel a little bit rusty and so forth. Now, if you shot a basketball every day, your skill level is going to improve much better. It's going to improve to a much higher degree. This is similar in that we're talking about a level of familiarity and perfection in the movement that you don't get with a lower frequency. So with that said, if there's some reason that you cannot do full body sessions, maybe it's a time requirement or an equipment availability issue or something like that, then yes, you can rearrange them into upper lower workouts. But I don't recommend it because the training frequency is an important factor. With that said, there are times when we will put training frequency on a back burner. So earlier I mentioned satellite cell activation as being the goal of one particular block of training. When we hit that block of training, we will use an upper lower split because it's more conducive to the effects that we're trying to create. So I would just recommend that you keep with the higher frequency stuff. If it seems like it's a lot to recover from for now, just stick with it. In a few weeks, it'll get better. And then you'll continue to improve. You'll continue to get used to it over time, and you'll have a lot of improvement as a result. All right. This next question up says, I recently asked about lockout issues on the deadlift. You recommended seated Zercher good mornings with extra extension at the top. I just can't get the feel of it. I tried similar movements: safety bar good mornings, seated safety bar good mornings, seated barbell good mornings, seated chain good mornings. None of them felt like they were hitting the right place. I decided to try recreating the exact position I'm having a problem with and work from there. I can get into that position fine. It allows me to use more weight, and it feels very specific to my problem, but I wanted to know your thoughts. Am I just further ingraining a bad movement pattern? Should I be looking to lift out of that bad lockout position and grind through to the end of the lift? Or is the goal with strengthening the spinal erectors to not end up in that position in the first place? Okay, good question. So just to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly, it seems like you're doing a rack pull, essentially. You're mimicking the rounded over position and then completing the lift. That's how you're going to get the most transfer. Excuse me. That's how you're going to get the most transfer from your rack pulls, for sure. With that said, let's see. You tried to recreate the exact position. You can get in a position. It allows you to use more weight. It's very specific. Are you just ingraining a bad movement pattern? The first question has to be, what's your intent? If you're fine being a round back deadlifter, then continue on the path that you are. I think that's going to allow you to deadlift the most weight. And we've talked at length in the past over what the pros and cons and the risks and benefits to round back deadlifting are. If you're aware of all that and you're fine being a round back deadlifter, then I don't think it's ingraining a bad movement pattern because this is your competition movement pattern. If you're trying to be a flat back deadlifter, then yes, this is ingraining a bad movement pattern and you do not want to continue on this path. If you haven't gone through the arguments and made a conscious decision to be a round back deadlifter, then I recommend that that be your next step. I've written about it pretty extensively. I know I've got at least one article on it, and we've talked about it in the coaching call in the past. And you can search in the forum to find other instances where we've discussed round back deadlifting and what those risks are. Now, if we assume that you're coming at this from an informed position and you want to remain a round back deadlifter, then no, you're not ingraining a bad movement pattern. And in fact, this is how you should do your rack pulls. Now, with that said, the supplemental movements are not necessarily, like, the intent of the supplemental movements isn't to duplicate that position. The intent of your supplemental movements is just to train the spinal erectors. So doing good mornings and doing the seated Zercher good mornings and Zercher squats or whatever else trains your erectors, it may not feel like it's hitting the exact area. Try to find a lift that duplicates it closely. I mean, if your rounding comes primarily from lumbar, then maybe like a reverse hyper or 45-degree back raise or something like that. If most of your rounding is thoracic, then maybe the good mornings, the safety squat bar and stuff like that would be closer in the mechanic. It doesn't have to be exact, and it won't be exact for your supplemental movements. The idea for the supplemental movements is just to train that muscle. Train that muscle to get a little bit bigger, produce more myofibers, and that's going to allow you to generate more force over time. So I guess in short, you're going to need both. And then the last part to your question, should I be looking to lift out of this position, or is the goal with strengthening the spinal erectors to not end up in this position in the first place? Strengthening your spinal erectors is going to be common to both scenarios. So I was talking about whether you wanted to be a round back puller or flat back puller. For you, in both of those scenarios, you're going to have to strengthen your erectors. It just comes down to which movement pattern are you going to train and develop. If you're going to be a flat back puller, you need to strengthen your erectors, and then you need to train them to get into a flat back position and maintain that position in high tension. If your intention is to be a round back puller, you need to strengthen your erectors because that's what you need to lock out the weight, and then you need to train them in the position that they're going to be in when you're deadlifting. All right, let's see. I got another question last week and then this week that's relating to military PT tests, in particular the Air Force PT test, in particular the 1.5 mile run. How do I recommend that you get in shape for a 1.5 mile run test if you're a powerlifter who also happens to be in the military? I can tell you how I did it. It worked really well, and we can just kind of go from there. Now, keep in mind that my goal was not to max the run test. My primary physical goal was about powerlifting. I did not need to be able to run 1.5 miles for my job. So for me, being able to pass the PT test was a matter of keeping my job, not getting in trouble, and continuing to be able to powerlift and weigh whatever I needed to weigh to powerlift effectively. So for me, passing the PT test was just kind of a gateway to get to do what I wanted with powerlifting. So I had to meet the standard, I had to pass, but to go beyond that, it didn't really mean much to me. So my goal was passing. What I did for that, I would start a month to a month and a half before the PT test, and I would start to train not exclusively, but train for the PT test in earnest. Outside of that 6-week, maybe 8-week window, I didn't really focus on it. I might do a bit of running. I might do a little bit of interval work. I might get on a rower or a bike or something like that for my GPP. I still did energy system work, but it was just part of the GPP package. Now, once I hit that 6-week mark, and especially once I got down to around 4 weeks out, it was time to really make sure that I'm able to pass this test. So I knew what time I had to run it in. And for me, it was around 12 or 13 minutes. I was always shooting for around 12 and a half, just to make sure that I think that's right. I think passing was pretty close to 13 minutes, maybe 12:50 or something. And I was shooting for 12:30 to make sure I had a little bit of a buffer. So I knew how much time I had, so I would work out what my pacing would be. I would find whatever track, it was North Dakota. So in the wintertime, I was running on an indoor track, and it just so happened to work out to be 12 laps, 12 or 13 laps. So my goal then was to do a lap a minute. And that would keep me on pace. If I was running outside and it was going to be six laps, then there was a lap every 2 minutes, or half a lap a minute, or something along those lines. Basically, you work out what your pacing is in order to run the race at your goal pace. And then I would just start to run at that pace. So let's say, take the indoor track example. I had to run 12 laps in 12 minutes. So I would just start running at a pace that put me on about a minute a lap. If I ran a lap, and I'm timing it this whole way, and if I ran on faster than that, I would slow down just a little bit. And if I was slower than that, I would speed up. And I would just keep that up for as long as possible. Now, the first one of these of the season, I might get 10 laps. If I'm in decent shape to start. So that's not a mile and a half, and that's failing the test. But you're still 4 weeks out, so you have some time. So I would run as long as I could, keep up that goal pace, and then I would stop. I would rest for a minute, maybe 2 minutes, and then pick it back up at that goal pace until I finished my mile and a half. Rest a few days, come back and repeat it. It wasn't long until I could, complete the whole thing in my goal pace. So what ended up happening usually is the first 6 laps would be about 5 seconds fast for me. And so, I'm thinking, okay, you're a little bit ahead. So slow it down just a hair, but it's tough to slow it down just 5 seconds. At least for me, I'm not that good at pacing. Somewhere after the halfway point, the time would start to drop. I would have maybe 2 laps that are bang on 1 minute, and then I'm looking at a minute 3, a minute 5, or something like that, and I'm thinking, hurry up, run faster. It's hard though, because you're gassed, and so those last few laps are going to, and they may even creep out to around a minute 10 or something like that. But after the first couple days, I would let it creep out to around a minute 10 before I would start thinking like, okay, it's time to stop and take a break and get back on my goal pace. And so after the first couple sessions, I could at least complete the mile and a half and really close to the goal pace time. Maybe it was 13:15 or 13:30 or something like that. You keep going a couple more times, and before you know it, you're there. So it's kind of a long story to say that this goal pace thing, it took it about 3 weeks at least before I was happy with where I was at. So that's why I would start at 4 weeks, even 6 weeks out. And if you've never done it before, I definitely recommend that you give it the full 6 weeks. And now I'm talking about doing it maybe twice a week. If you're closer, then you need to do it more often, 3, even 4 times a week, which leads me to another point. This is not an easy thing to do for those of us who struggle to pass the 1.5 miles. I would recommend that you do it on your non-lifting days. Now, if you do it on your non-lifting days and you're doing it 2-3 days a week, that's all you need. I don't think you need a lot of additional running. In a lot of cases, you probably shouldn't do additional running outside of that. Now, if your goal is something beyond what I'm talking about, then you may need a program that's beyond what I'm talking about, and we should probably have a different conversation. But if that's something that interests you, let me know, and we'll go from there. All right, that was kind of a long question, or a long answer to the question. A shorter question then would be, how long do I rest between sets? Basically, we're looking for near complete rest. So depending on how much weight's on the bar, what your RPE is, how many reps you're doing, how good a shape you're in, and some other factors, it usually ends up being 3 to 7 minutes. That's a pretty big range. So basically just rest as long as you need to. This is not an incomplete rest program unless it's specifically designated, like we talked about density training earlier in this call. That's specifically designated to be incomplete rest, but there's no ambiguity when you go into it. Otherwise, rest as long as you need to. For if you have a really tough set, like say you have your top set of the day is 5 reps at a 9 RPE, you might rest a little bit longer leading into that set so that you perform well. You might rest a little bit longer after that set so that you can actually have a good performance on the next one. But similarly, if you're doing a triple or double at a 6 RPE, you don't really need a ton of time after that's over. Next question up says, my first week's training has 2 lifting days. I'm used to 3 days on starting strength. Is it 2 days to begin with and then ramping up to 3? Yes, it is. So you can consider this first week just kind of an intro week. It's to get your feet wet. It's to make sure that we're working out any kinks. We're getting over any initial soreness. A lot of times, you know, if you're coming in post-competition or after a layoff or something like that, your volume tolerance is lower. So this is a way for you to kind of ease into that without just totally shocking yourself by going into a really tough training week all at once. Next question up says, after starting back from a recent injury, with your meet being just around the corner, how do we adjust the game plan? And do we even need any days off going into the meet? Good question. The only way I would say don't take any time off during the meet, or to take less time off than you were originally planning during for the meet, is if you're just not carrying the amount of fatigue that you expected to going into the meet, which for us usually is very little. So unless your injury is like 1 or 2 weeks out from the competition, or rather 2 or 3 weeks out from the competition, you're probably going to continue tapering as normal. With that said, you probably will also have to adjust your game plan, but we usually wait until about 7 days, maybe 8 days prior, before we are building those game plans anyway. So game plan wise, you're going to want to pretty much follow the same procedure that we've talked about before. You'll just very heavily weight your algorithm to favor your performances after your injury. Now, before that scares anybody off, it's pretty easy to do. You're just looking at your post-injury performances to gauge where your strength is at, rather than your pre-injury performances, which is something that all of you would do instinctively anyway. So that's what I would recommend in terms of modifying your game plan. All right, next question says, I was hoping to move up a weight class in the next while and wanted to know your thoughts on this. I'm a little over 5'5" and lift in the 59 kilo class. So realistically speaking, I'm about 20 kilos underweight. Do you have a set protocol for moving up a weight group, shifting toward higher rep training for hypertrophy? Can I expect to gain much from better leverages? How long roughly should it take for me to settle in a new weight? Good questions. I don't think you're going to be terribly satisfied with my answers. It's just that we deal with a lot of ambiguity. So let's talk about it. If you weigh around 60 kilos and you would like to weigh 80 kilos, you're talking about gaining about 30%, 33% of your current weight, gaining that over. That is a huge weight increase. So this is something that's going to take a long time. It's going to be I recommend a really gradual weight increase, because getting fat it's hard to see that it's not helping, because you'll gain a little bit of muscle with your fat, but just getting fat isn't going to help you nearly as much as just getting really muscular. If you're gaining 2 kilos of muscle and 18 kilos of fat, yeah, you'll be a little stronger. But if you gain, 16 kilos of muscle and 4 kilos of fat, that's it's debatable on how likely that is to actually happen, but you get the idea of what I'm getting at. The idea is to gain more muscle than you gain in fat. So don't rush this process. Each training cycle, eat your way up a little bit. Try to edge yourself up a little bit. I'm a big fan of monitoring in general. I monitor myself in a bunch of different ways. One way that I do it, I check my weight every morning, and I have one of those handheld bioelectrical impedance body fat measuring devices. Now, believe me, I know that they're not accurate in the sense of providing you a number that's close to your actual body fat percentage, although mine is probably not terribly far off for me. The point, though, is that you're looking for something to measure change. And I also understand that those devices are susceptible to error due to hydration and stuff like that, which is why I do that measurement daily. If you take the measurement daily, it takes you, 30 seconds at most. Then you have a daily measurement to base this stuff on. You're going to average out issues like hydration and stuff like that. And then you can look at 7-day averages, compare those to each other. You can look at 30-day averages and make those comparisons as well. And you'll be able to see, actually, I'm just getting fat, so I need to change something about my diet or training. Or that you're gaining a lot of muscle, or when it's time to cut, that you're losing mostly fat, and so forth. So it's really good information to have. I would recommend looking at a method like that. With that said, something to shoot for. It's hard to say. Just gain weight slowly, monitor your numbers, make sure that you are in fact gaining muscle, and manipulate it so that it takes a little bit of experimentation, but manipulate it so that you're gaining as much muscle as you can tolerate. And then when you have those cutting phases, that you're losing as much fat as possible. And over time, you're going to kind of eke your way into a higher weight class, and hopefully nearer to your overall potential. All right. Next question says, I was wondering if there's a percentage to aim for when doing pause squats or deficit deadlifts, or deadlifts rather, pause squats and pause deadlifts. For example, I'm currently doing about 15 kilos less for my normal squats and deadlifts, and I'm wondering if this is normal or if this indicates a weakness for me. So normal, you can count on losing 5 to 10% for each additional second of pause. So a squat has, competition squat has no pause. So if you can do a 1-count pause with 90% or a 2-count pause with 80, 85%, then that's pretty much normal. If you're far below those numbers, it doesn't necessarily indicate a weakness or not. A lot of times it's just a matter of familiarity with those movements. Um, we really avoid determining weaknesses, weak range of motion, weak muscle groups, or anything like that based on assistance work, because it's easy to get, in my opinion, it's easy to start chasing rabbits down holes when you're looking at assistance work. Well, my close grip bench is really below what my training partner's close grip bench is, but my board press is way better. Well, I don't know. And it's irrelevant, because if we look at how your competition bench moves, then we can compare you to yourself. We can look at it with a few objective measures and get a good idea of what's strong or weak. The other stuff, I think, just clutters the issue. It's not even really complication. It's just noise. So with that, let's go on to the next question. This one says, I just wanted your thoughts on my testing next week to build my custom RPE chart. I've been using your normal one, but the percents seem a bit off for me. How would this affect where I plan, or should I wait? I recommend that you wait, build a custom RPE chart post peak. So if you have your contest or you have your test day, rest yourself for 3, 4, 5 days, and then do the RPE chart protocol. That way you're as far from a competition as possible. You get a full cycle of organized training leading into your next competition. The chart itself is not essential, which is why we don't require that you guys customize your RPE charts. It allows you to estimate 1-rep maxes, estimate target weights a little bit better, and stuff like that. But that's all stuff that you can do without the custom RPE chart. So it's definitely a nice to have, and I think you should definitely do that protocol, but just wait until your post test. All right. Okay, let's check out a couple videos. All right, first video up, we've got Clark's deadlift. We're going to watch this one primarily for technique. Okay, this is roughly your starting position, which is actually a pretty good position. I think your mechanics are really well suited to sumo deadlifting. You mentioned in your email that you're a little bit concerned about a knees out position, that your knees aren't out enough. They could be out more, but I mean, they're out. To me, it's not a problem where you're at. But yeah, if you can open up your hips a little bit more over time, then that might be better. If not, you might want to close your stance in just a little bit. I mean, like an inch or two on each side would be plenty. Just to see how that affects your mechanics. If this is your strongest position, I don't really see anything bad or dangerous about it at all. With that said, I know that this is a 6-rep set of sumo deadlifts, and maybe you were slowing this down so that you can focus on technical movements and stuff like that. I would like to see you get into a little bit better rhythm so that you're not taking quite so long between repetitions. That's really a nitpick. That's not really a complaint. Like if you send me another video in a few weeks and it looks the same, then I might say this again, but it's not like I'm going to get angry or irritated about it. And finding a better rhythm may or may not help you in terms of 1 rep max over the long term. I mean, I kind of doubt it, but it's just something that I typically like to see. It shows a little bit technical proficiency. It shows it'll allow you to be a little bit more precise with your reps and RPEs and things like that as well. But overall, no, I don't see any complaints. I think your technique is definitely above bar. And if you just continue along the same line, then I think you're going to be fine. Okay, next video is Clark's squat. And we're looking at this one for technique as well. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, Clark. Okay. I did not catch you quite in the bottom position here, but we're pretty close. I have more concerns about the squat. The first is that you've got a really low bar position, which is fine. I mean, it doesn't look like it's illegally low or anything, although you're close. Yeah, so it's just something I noticed. The biggest issue that I've got is that you've got a lot of extraneous movement. When you walked out, there's a lot of steps in your walkout that didn't really do anything. I would encourage you to watch Matt Gary's video on setting up a squat. We've got a link to it in the guided programming forum, so you can find that one. You should definitely check it out. Depth is a concern for me. Now, this angle is really not the best to see depth, but just based on your hip action, I'm not quite sure if it's there. Now, it very well may be, and it's just not apparent in your hip action. Also, let me back it up a rep here and see something else. A little more. A lot of this is stuff that's maybe a minor issue. It's just a technical mastery issue. Like you just don't look terribly comfortable with the movement. Like you break at the hips way before anything else, but not just like you're breaking at the hips first. It's in a little bit of an uncoordinated way. And I don't mean that to be insulting. It's just that I'm going to assume that you've recently transitioned to this technique or something like that, because it just doesn't look like it's a terribly comfortable pattern for you. Now, if that's the case and you have recently transitioned to this, then it might be something that you'll get used to in the next several weeks. But also, if this is something that you've been doing for a while, then we need to think about how to blend this a little bit more and make it a bit of more refined movement pattern overall. Oh yeah. Sorry, before I move on, you mentioned that you were concerned about your forward lean at the bottom. That's really low on my priority list as far as stuff to look at. I don't think it's excessive. It's really a product of your mechanics. So as we change your mechanics, your forward lean might change. So let's talk about what you can do from here. And it's going to be just to kind of blend this a little bit more. You might try to put the bar on, although in this frame that we have it on, it looks like the bar is sitting on a shelf. So maybe your bar position's fine. Yeah, I wouldn't really worry about the forward lean so much. That's more of a product of whatever keeps you in balance. So to me, let's work on just general movement pattern stuff. Let's make it a little bit more of a refined movement. And then once we get that down, then you'll be in a much better position to worry about other stuff, other technical fixes and stuff like that. If it's possible for you to get a slightly lower camera angle, so we can look at your depth, that could be telling as well, because we could see like how much are your knees moving over your toes and stuff like that. And we could possibly see some other technical things. But from what I see in this video, there are some things that we can work on, but generally I think we're okay. All right. So that's all for the questions that we have for this week. For those of you who are able to be here live and watch, if you do have a question, go ahead and type it in quickly, and I'll see if I can get that answered before we wrap up. But while you're doing that, I just wanted to take a minute and just say congratulations to Robert Werman. He competed last weekend. It was the last meet of this year. He said he totaled 680 kilos at 117 kilos and set his Wilks score to 393. So, Robert, you're really, really close to that 400 Wilks, man. Robert's added 105 kilos to his total this year. So, big congrats to Robert. You're doing great. Keep up the good work, man. 105 kilos, man. I would love to add half of that to my total in 2 years. But that's amazing progress, man. Congratulations. Keep up the good work. You're able to be reclassed. I mean, you're getting stronger at a really good pace. I don't think we should change anything, but just a word to you, Robert, that your strength has increased so much at this point that when things start to plateau a little bit, let me know, and we're going to move you to a different group because you're so much stronger now. Your needs have changed. This is exactly what we like to see with guided programming too, that you enter at a certain level, you get stronger and stronger, and then you're able to progress to a different level. You know, it's not that I did the program, now I have the program. This is long-term development. This is annual planning. Each training cycle is different. We're developing you over the course of a year. And then just like in Robert's case, after a year, you've gained so much strength that you're able to move to a different group and do that training over the course of another year if you want. So this goes on and on. You know, this is athlete development. I mean, if you prefer to do your own programming, by all means, you know, I do my own programming. But if you don't want to take the time to learn and figure out how to do that stuff at a high level, that's what we do. This is what we specialize in. So anyway, I got off on a tangent. I don't mean to take anything away from Robert and his achievement. 105 kilos on your total, very near 400 Wilks. Excellent work, Robert. Keep up the good work. All right, now with that, let me see if there are any questions. Let's see if I know how to look for questions. That would be another thing to wonder. I don't think we have any questions for this week. All right, yeah, I don't think we have any questions for this week, so that's going to wrap things up for this week. As always, thanks everyone for watching. Good luck with your training this week. As always, remember to take what's there, build some momentum. We'll see you next time.